much. Good morning.
Good morning.
Don't get too comfortable. I don't want you to fall asleep. It's nice to see everybody today. Welcome to our guests and our visitors. Glad to see you here. And I hope that the service today will be evidence of that. Sorry about my child there, my fur baby. I told her not to do that. The birth of modern American spiritualism had its humble beginning on March 31st, 1848. At that same time, there was a movement, the women's suffrage movement, that also was taking place, and a petition was signed. And when we think of petitions today, we think of probably thousands of signatures. But this petition was called the Declaration of Sentiment, that was signed by 300 people, a lot of people back then. And and it was presented in New York to support women having the right to vote. I'm telling you these things because I want to give you some context of a time frame and how we've evolved so quickly and dramatically since that time. In 1866, the Congress passed the Declaration, the 14th Amendment, that defined citizens and voters as males. So that Declaration of Sentiment never really got off the ground. That women's suffrage time went from 1848, when that declaration was signed, to about 1920. Surprisingly, in 1890, the first state to pass a law allowing women to vote in the Union was the state of Wyoming. It was signed to law in Cheyenne, Wyoming in 1890. That wasn't that long ago, and it wasn't that long ago since there was men and women were together out of necessity in every physical sense. In the early 1800s and before that, men needed to go out and hunt and bring back game to feed families, and women needed to have an abundance of children because there were farms that needed, crops that needed tending, and farms that needed to be taken care of. And now, just really in the grand scheme of things, a few years later, that's no longer necessary. We're not together anymore because of necessity. We're together for another reason. And that reason is really an evolvement of humanity. There's a new word that's being batted around. I don't know if any of you have heard of this word or not. It's being batted around in the scientific community, and by philosophers and life coaches and the medical field. And as we evolve, this word is called the transphysical world. The transphysical world is making reference to the non-physical human being, the non-physical human world. That's what they're calling the transphysical world. I'm so glad they're finally catching up with us, you know, the spiritualists. We've known this for a very long time. We're on the cusp right now of a time when science, and this is what's going to make the difference for us as spiritualists, when science is actually going to find their answer to prove the continuity of life, something that spiritualism has purported as a truth and a universal truth for a very long time. Less than 20 years ago, so it's within most of our lifetimes, with me, of course, as an exception. I'm kidding. Less than 20 years ago, any scientist that dared to come forward and decide to study or investigate or make an attempt to prove this trans-physical world, which that word isn't even in dictionaries yet, I don't think, was thought to be some sort of a quack and practicing non-scientific means. He was put down by his fellow scientific community. The fellow scientific community found this not an acceptable form of scientific study. Today, as we're evolving, more and more and more people are getting on board with understanding that there's more to us than this simple physical existence that such a short period of time ago, 100, 150, 170 years ago, when we were together out of necessity, was the only thing that we could deal with. We couldn't deal with anything more because we had only so much energy, and once we produced the food, and once the man came back from the hunt, and the woman had her babies, and the crops were tended, and so on and so forth, there was little time spent looking anywhere else. The good news is, as we're evolving, we have more time. And because we have more time, and because other things are showing up for us, things that we don't have answers for, and we want answers for those things. We want to know what happens to us after we die, after we shed our physical bodies. We want to know what happens to us where we go. We want to know if heaven and hell are places or states of being. We want answers to these things. And of course, spiritualism answers many of those questions, right? The people that first started studying about spiritualism when modern American spiritualism had its humble beginning, and we celebrate the birthday of modern American spiritualism on March 31st, 1848. Why Spirit came to us then, why Spirit chose to come through in the manner in which they did, which was through the wrappings of a man by the name of Charles Rosna, who was a peddler, who actually got murdered. I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up in a soap opera. You know, this is stuff that we couldn't have fathomed. And on top of that, he came through to little girls. It's interesting. We don't know why that's so. There's a lot of speculation about it. But we don't have any facts to support why it all happened, when it did, and how it happened, and what the ramifications of all this is. But when I was looking up stuff to talk to you about today, I looked at this and I said, wow, this is like really interesting stuff, because isn't it interesting that the women's suffrage movement was happening at the same time? In 1848 is when that Declaration of Sentiment was signed, asking for women's rights, and then this man comes through from the spirit side of life, and he comes through little girls. I just thought that was interesting. I don't know if there's any correlation there, but it's interesting stuff, right? So this trans-physical world, this non-physical human expression of life, is being looked at by not only scientists, but philosophers, life coaches, medical doctors, people in all walks of life, much the same as when modern American spiritualism came to be, and the greatest minds of the day were looking at that. Now, what happened back then was these minds came together and they looked at it coming through the back door. They didn't say, oh, this is great stuff, let's go about proving that it's so. What did they say? We're coming in, we're going to prove that it's not so. And what happened? What happened was that they found out that in their efforts to prove that all of this phenomena, these wrappings through these little girls and the demonstration of spirit through these little girls that was coming through, they couldn't disprove it. So they became what we know today as the pioneers of spiritualism. They were the visionaries back then that were brave enough to take up the gauntlet and study this stuff. And now we have, fast forward to today, and now we have these groups of people coming from different walks of life studying this trans-physical world, who are visionaries. And are these very people going to become the pioneers of tomorrow that stand up and proclaim the truths as we know them, as spiritualists know them, that life is a continuum, life goes on, and we can indeed communicate with those from the spirit side of life? There's a lot of different terminology. We've probably all heard the term quantum mechanics, right? Well, there's a lot of quantums now. Again, these same people, the scientists and the doctors and philosophers and so on, they're using the term quantum mechanics as a broad stroke umbrella terminology for subsections of the quantum world. Quantum healing, quantum understanding, quantum physics, quantum science. Through this world, although the terminology has changed dramatically, through this world, those people that are studying all of this same stuff are not so much unlike those individuals who studied spiritualism back in its beginning, modern American spiritualism I'm speaking about. What are we going to learn? What are we going to learn as we come forward? Spiritualism is not only a religion. It's a science and a philosophy. And those of us who have been in spiritualism a while have come to learn spiritualism is more than just something that you do on a Sunday. It becomes a way of life. I can't imagine, and most of you I think that are here probably couldn't imagine your lives without it. I don't know what people do who don't have the knowledge of the continuity of life, that know that their loved ones are okay and they live on. The thing that sets spiritualism apart from many of the other religions out there is that spiritualism asks, don't believe a word I'm saying, they ask you to step into spiritualism as newcomers and investigate and learn for yourself. Stay long enough to give it a fair shot. Don't come one time and say, well, I don't know, I don't understand it, it's not for me, goodbye. I'm running back to my comfort zone of wherever it is you've come from religiously, whether it be Christianity or Judaism or whatever. Spiritualism is a baby in a religious sense. It hasn't been around very long at all. Give it a shot. Investigate for yourself. Proof, your knowledge, your knowing will come to you if you stay long enough to investigate this religion. There is no question about it. Spiritualism needs to evolve, and it is evolving. If ever you've read some of the books, and I know that there are several of us here that have, that were written back in the mid-1800s, the way, even though it was written in English, the way that the words were put together, the sentence structures and the different terminologies that were used, it's hard to understand. And I know when I first started reading those kind of books, I struggled, and it took me a long time to get through a paragraph, because it wasn't that I couldn't understand the concept behind it, but I was having trouble understanding how we used the English language back then. And that's changed. And today I'm saying to you that as the scientific community steps forward and uses different terminology, such as our quantum understanding, or the quantum studies, or the transphysical world, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. What we need to remember is that there are certain universal truths that never, never, never change. We as spiritualists must not stand still. We need to evolve. We need to move forward. And we need to support those people who are today's visionaries that will become the pioneers of tomorrow, that one day we will say and stand together, perhaps with different terminology, but together we will stand and we will say, life continues and life goes on. And I know as we evolve, we progress. And as we progress, we learn. And I am looking forward, as many of you are, to the day when it becomes common for all of us, all of humanity, to gather together and say, there is no death. There are no dead. God bless you.